Jeff Hafley spoke to the South Florida media yesterday and gave us no shortage of storylines as the Dolphins open their doors for offseason workouts.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krebs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, NFL staff writer for A to Z Sports. Special welcome and shout out to each and every one of you who are tuning in on a hump day. It is Wednesday, April 8th. Jeff Hafley spoke to the media yesterday, and we're going to get into Devon Achane and his status is not present. Should we be worried? Should we be concerned? Should we not be? He talked about his message to quarterback Malik Willis as Malik enters into the first day and first week with his new teammates here in South Florida. But he started with a question about multiplicity within his defense. And I think it was really compelling, his answer. Credit to Omar Kelly, who asked the question and got him going about the ability to be hybrid in how you play defense and with your fronts. And Jeff took that to kind of the coverage and the back end as well. So I actually pulled this clip. It's 90 seconds long. I want to start here. And I want to talk about this. This goes into some of the stuff that we talked yesterday with some of our defensive tackles. This goes into the draft evaluations for guys that play on the edge, guys that can play off the ball, guys that can play at safety, guys that can play at corner/nickel. Right? This is the root of the rat race that teams are facing right now all across the league. When teams like the Rams come out in 13 personnel, they put 3 tight ends on the field, but they can throw the heck out of the ball with 3 tight ends on the field. That puts you in a bind. If a team comes out with 11 personnel and those receivers are big and physical and can block better than your average wide receiver and can block defensive ends and linebackers, it puts you in a bind. And that's why it's a more you can do league. And Jeff Hafley talked a good bit about personnel and multiplicity. I'm going to let him talk, and then we're going to go bit by bit. And we may or may not, if you're watching on YouTube, we may actually kind of talk through some of what Jeff Hafley's talking about from a chess pieces on the board perspective. So I'll let Jeff Hafley present his philosophy on multiplicity defensively, because I thought it was a great answer.
I just look at defense a little bit different when you look at 4-3 versus 3-4. For example, right now, if a team comes out in 11 personnel, right, one tight end, one back, 3 wideouts, on early downs, most everybody's playing 4 down. You're 4-3. So whether you say you're a 3-4 defense, most teams versus 11 with a nickel on the field are going to be 4-3. So there's always some element of it. If you watched my film in the past, you might say, oh, he's 3-4 here, but we're still playing with 40 linemen. So were we 4-3 or were we 3-4? We were 4 down, 4-3 base, but we were playing 3-4 odd spacing. We just reduced the front, kicked the backer down. So now it looks like we have 5 down linemen and we look like we're playing 3-4. So I think there's an element of everything. It's just who do you decide to do it with? If you're better off playing it at a 3-4 personnel, you're probably only going to do that in 12 and 21 personnel, in my opinion. Or what I'd rather do is play it at a 4 down. If I have to change based on who our roster ends up with, then I'll change. But I got no problem doing that. You're going to see elements of both regardless. You just might see different jersey numbers and people doing it. It's like, here's another example. You want to call it a 4-2-5 or a 4-3. Like, what's the difference? You got a nickel out there. Well, what happens when I put in a big nickel, a safety to play the nickel? Is that a different? It's all the same. It's just jersey numbers and people. So I don't get too caught up in all that stuff.
Jersey numbers and people. And I want to talk a little bit about what Jeff's talking about here from it felt so pertinent because we just did the defensive tackle conversation about how big of a menu do they view Kenneth Grant and Jordan Phillips and Zeek Biggers and some of these defensive tackles that have length maybe give you that extra front side defensive end so that you're linebackers can kind of serve as the outside containment. If you get into pass rush situation, you can do exactly what he talked about and reduce the front, kick the linebacker down, and now you got 5 guys up on the line of scrimmage, and that's how you can kind of dictate protection rules for the opposing team. So I want to talk through kind of how this works. And if you're watching on YouTube, there is a diagram. This is meant and intended to be equal experience for audible learners and listeners and consumers and video listeners, watchers, and consumers. But I do want to talk about what Jeff Hafley's talking about here and kind of talk about the part about, say you're in 4 down, right? With 4 down defensive linemen. That would be your 2 defensive ends and your 2 defensive tackles. Hence 4 down. So what I drew up here is out of trips right, which is 2 receivers and a tight end to the right-hand side. I put the quarterback under center just for simplicity's sake. Running back is set behind him in the backfield. And then you have your isolated, your X receiver who's on the backside of the formation. And I drew up 4-3 base defense lined up on the other side of that. And I put him in a cover 3 distribution, right? So there's a single high safety up top. The strong safeties roll down over top of the number 2 receiver. And then your third linebacker, if you're in true 4-3, would be an off-ball player who's playing over top of the tight end. This player, this Sam linebacker / star defender, is a really important chess piece to exactly what we're talking about with the rat race of matching personnel, because you could play off the ball. If you do what Jeff Hafley talks about and says, well, now we want to get to, we're going to play with 4 down personnel, but we're going to kick the front down and pull this linebacker down on the line of scrimmage. Now you might have to be able to rush the passer. If you can't, maybe they sub this out and he becomes a third safety like Jeff Hafley's talking about to be your big nickel, or as a corner would be a second corner that would have to deal with matchups against either your tight ends or wide receivers. So from a 4 down look, to be able to play odd front spacing, you would have to kick your backside defensive end out into from a tight alignment over top of the offensive tackle out into like a wide 9 as a stand-up 2-point stance player. Your defensive tackles would likely end up with some kind of shaded nose tackle and playing in the B gap between the offensive tackle and the offensive guard. And what was your front side defensive end now has to be able to play either head up on the tackle or also in between the guard and the tackle. And now you're in a much more congested area, right? One of your defensive tackles now has to become a nose tackle. And that Sam linebacker that we're talking about now drops down on the line of scrimmage, and you would push your linebackers to have 2 off-ball linebackers instead of 3. So you're reducing the front to an under front where they're pushed and set away from the formational strength with wherever the tight end is. And what could have been a 3 technique in 4 down with the same personnel is either going to be playing as a 4-eye, which is inside shoulder of the offensive tackle, or potentially, especially if it's a passing down, now you're rushing from the nose. And your defensive end, who was put to the tight end side, now all of a sudden is either head up on an offensive tackle or in the B gap, and he has to be able to do a little bit more of controlling of the point of attack as compared to bullying a tight end. And your Sam linebacker, who was off the ball playing as a coverage option over top of the tight end, now is a rush player off the edge. And your backside defensive end, who was in the tight alignment, now has to play from width and space and have first step explosiveness to be able to attack the line of scrimmage. So that's just this. It's just one really rudimentary example, but you can very quickly see it's just numbers and personnel, right? That's what Jeff Hafley said. It's just jersey numbers and people. And you can very easily take the same exact personnel if you're comfortable with the menu that they can present. And that doesn't mean like the entire front just has to everybody shuffle down the line one personnel. Maybe your 3 technique on the front side becomes your defensive end on the backside. Maybe that linebacker's the guy that depending on if it's 3rd and 12 or if it's 1st and 10, is an actual linebacker or a rush player. Now, we saw this last year with the Dolphins where there were reps at the end of the season where Cam Good and early in the season, Jalen Phillips are playing off the ball because of based on that week's personnel plan. When we get this formation, we want to give this defensive formation to best protect ourselves from what we think we're vulnerable of. Now, playing Jalen Phillips and Cam Good as a will linebacker off the ball kind of illustrates how this idea can be challenged if you don't have great ambiguity with your personnel, right? But that's where I think Willie Gay has a chance to be a meaningful player for the Dolphins after, what was a really quiet and disappointing season last year, because I think he can play coverage off-ball linebacker and can also be somebody who can give you some level of value rushing on the line of scrimmage. He did that in Kansas City. Now, I think the Chiefs, the Saints spammed that in 2024 way too far and asked him to be a line of scrimmage player way too often. Right? There's a balance with all of it. And that goes back to what Jeff Hafley talked to me about when I asked about the combine, about positional flexibility and guys that could play different spots. So we look back at what we did in Green Bay. We probably did that too much with some guys, but other guys are great at it. So we'll finish that thought on the other side of the break, and then we'll get into some of the other things that Jeff Hafley talked about next. Make sure you guys stick with us. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by BetterHelp. Financial stress is something a lot of people are carrying right now, and it's not just about the numbers. It can affect your sleep, your relationships, your overall mental health, and the way that builds up over time, it can be really heavy, right? The reality is struggling with money doesn't mean that you failed at anything. Sometimes it just means you haven't had the right kind of support. It's something I think about often. I put a lot of pressure on myself to provide for the family, and I don't want to put any stress or burden onto the rest of the family for things I might not have the answers for immediately, right? You have that pressure to have everything together. You don't want to burden your loved ones. Therapy isn't about financial advice. It's about working through the stress, anxiety, and emotions that come with it. With over 30,000 licensed therapists and more than 6 million people served, BetterHelp makes it easier to get matched and start focusing on what you need. When life feels overwhelming, therapy can help. Sign up and get 10% off at BetterHelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Do want to extend the invitation for everybody else who's still listening to check out the Everydayer Club, where you get ad-free episodes of the program, access to the Locked On Community Discord with other listeners of the show. You can find the join link in the show description below. So this question and answer from Jeff Hafley, I think what it does underscore is this is going to take some time, right? The full realization of this doesn't happen with an investment of a few players. And I had a bunch of feedback from folks yesterday that said, why would you draft a defensive tackle when you have 3 young defensive tackles? If they don't feel that there is an appropriate amount of versatility within the room, it probably necessitates you, like Zeek Biggers as a defensive tackle might be most attractive to them. As Jeff Hafley said, he might be a 4-3 or a 3-4 end, might be what they feel he's suited to serve in your defense. And if that's the case, like Hafley said, if you're going to play 3-4, you're probably only going to do that against 12 and 21 personnel. There's not a lot of teams that live in that world. So that means for 14 to 11 games on the schedule, you're talking about 15 snaps a game, tops, situationally, short yardage. A lot of defensive tackles aren't playing 800 snaps, and we got kind of spoiled with that with Zach and Christian for a while. I mean, those guys were snap sponges on the interior. You look, a lot of these guys, I mean, their top defensive tackles are playing 550 to 650 snaps. That means you got to be able to rotate these guys through. So I thought it was an exceptionally timely question and X's and O's type answer from Jeff Hafley on the heels of us just asking that question yesterday. about, off the heels of the news that they were having Christian Miller in for a defensive tackle visit as a 30 visit, and he's projected as a top 40, top 50 pick. That's why. Well, because if you told me that if it were me off of the assessment that I had last year and what I felt about the guys coming into the draft, and that's not a fair or full picture for those guys. And I'm not saying that's the final answer that defines what these guys are going to have for roles this year. I think Kenneth Grant has the physical ability and the physical profile of being a guy who can be a 3 technique, be a 5 technique, be a 4-eye, be a 1 tech, and rush in the A gaps, can line up in an even front in a 4 down as the 1 tech shaded off the center, or it could be a 3 technique. So if you're going to push the front, if you want to play 4 down spacing, you want to play 3 down spacing, I think he can play any of the spots if he develops the way that he's capable of. Jordan Phillips, I think in an even front, in the 4 down spacing, can be the 1 tech, the A-gap defender over top of the center and playing the A-gaps. And then as an odd front player, I think he can be your end or your nose tackle. But I don't think he's a 3 technique in even front when you go 4 down. So if you're an odd or even, I think you have places and seats at the table for both Phillips and Grant. Whereas Biggers, for me, I perceive as more of a odd front end. And maybe it's the front side, the formational strength side defensive end that's in a 4-eye or a 5 right over top of the offensive tackle, the tight ends to that side, and you've got the backer walked up outside of him, so he's got some more support. So you have pieces that fit certain roles, but if you're an even front spacing, I don't see a great forecast for Biggers right now to be a prominent snap taker. And you want to have a platoon and depth and more interchange. You don't only want to have 2 interchangeable guys. You don't have a rotation. Now, Zach Sealer obviously is in this calculus, and Jeff Hafley gave some great words of affirmation to Zach Sealer. I thought it was really cool that the first thing that he picked out about him was the picks and the stunts, because that's what I asked Zach about at training camp last year, about the art of doing that. And to have Hafley point that out was kind of really cool. That was one of the first things at top of mind as far as the defining value of Zach Sealer's player, and where I think he's still so good. Now, the guys around you got to be able to execute, right? And that's part of having young guys around him last year. So I don't want to bury another full show into kind of versatility of the front. I do want to touch on what Jeff Hafley said his advice was for Malik Willis. Here's what he said. I had a great conversation with Malik yesterday. He came to my office. I said, don't change who you are. Don't put in any extra pressure on yourself. You've earned the right to be here and have this opportunity, and you've done that by doing all the things the right way. Don't change that. Don't press. Just be you. I want to make sure that he understands that it doesn't have to be perfect. There's going to be mistakes made, and I want him to play with that confidence, and I want him to play with the way he's always done it. The number one, and I can't take credit for this saying, but I think it was Jordan Palmer who on Draft Dude / Locked On NFL Scouting not that long ago, we had him on as a guest, and Jordan Palmer said the number one common thread for successful quarterback play in the NFL, it's not an individual trait. It's not arm strength. It's not athleticism. It's not accuracy. The number one common trait for good quarterback play in the NFL is confidence. Whatever you're asked to do, if you're confident in how to execute it and how to read it, and you make fast decisions and you're convicted, by and large, that's the common thread, because there are different flavors of quarterback play across the NFL and different flavors of offensive schemes. Now, there's a lot of overlap, but how you go about doing it you can get to the good results in a lot of different ways. And for Malik Willis, right, if he's going to be a successful player in Miami, especially this year where there's going to be a lot of youth around him, that confidence in the storm of adversity and hardship and mistakes, I think, has to be where he serves as kind of the fixture on the horizon that everybody looks to, that keeps the storm from becoming overwhelming. And he's going to have to elevate the play of some of those people around him. I think he's physically capable of doing that. Now, how he actually responds in the moment, we'll see. But that, to me, is where the relationship, I think, is so valuable that exists between Hafley and Sullivan and Willis, is there's a familiarity, and it's been seen by these people that are now starting in new jobs, elevated positions. You don't know, it's not unknown what you're going to get. So for Jeff Hafley to be able to say to Malik Willis, hey, you stay you, because we've seen what that's looked like, and we know that that's good enough. We believe it's good enough. You're starting to push the button, the confidence button. And I think back to the past regimes, the Flores, Tua drafting, and say what you will about Tua, the player he was with Brian Flores and those offensive schemes, there was not a lot of confidence. And some of that's, because he didn't really know the playbook as a rookie and got thrown in there anyway. You remember that whole narrative about, Chan Gailey's saving all the good play calls for Ryan Fitzpatrick. Well, that's because Ryan Fitzpatrick knew the playbook, which you would totally expect for like a 37-year-old vet who'd played his best football for years playing for Chan Gailey. Chan didn't have a crappy version of the playbook to give to Tua. They could only work with what he was comfortable running. And then the 2021 season, you talk about how not to breed a confident quarterback or to flirt with Deshaun Watson amidst all these allegations against him for these horrific things all the way through the trade deadline. We're going to have 3 or 4 separate play callers all in the same season. None of it exuded confidence. And Mike McDaniel comes in to tailor to Tua and get a confident player on the field. And it works for a period of time. Now you run out of gas. You kind of hit the limitations of the build as a whole. And nobody, whether it was the coaching staff or the quarterback or the skill group or the offensive, whatever, nobody was able to evolve enough to break through the glass ceiling that they ran into. So for right now, if you're telling me, hey, Jeff Hafley's pushing the button to build the confidence for a young quarterback that comes in, and that quarterback's going to probably have more confidence and belief than with the people that he's working with, because a pre-existing relationship exists there, awesome. Can't guarantee it's going to stay working when we start playing for keeps in the fall. I'm not going to guarantee that. I don't know. We're all going to have to wait and see. But the relationship aiding the messaging to help work towards that confidence, I think is well done by Hafley. I appreciate the perspective that he offers, and I think it's absolutely the right message to give to a young quarterback who obviously has a big opportunity in front of him to seize the day and prove himself to be a quarterback that can be committed to on a long-term basis beyond the 3-year contract that he signed. Devon Achane was not there yesterday. We'll talk a little bit about that on the other side of the break. Make sure you guys stick with us. Let me first say this about Devon Achane and not being present at the offseason workouts that started yesterday. I'm unconcerned at this point. Would you love to not have to deal with that? Yes, absolutely. I think you would absolutely positively love to say everybody's here, everybody on the first day of school is all getting together, and everybody feels great about the start of this, and nobody's worried about the business side of it, and we can just focus on football. That's unfortunately not the world that we live in. And as Jeff Hafley said, it's the business. It's a part of the business. Every team goes through those situations and they'll work it out. I do believe they will work it out because Jon-Eric Sullivan has been pretty emphatic of it being a priority for them to get this contract done. Now, I think you're probably, with the cap rising, I know what my first offer would be, and it would be significantly higher than the James Cook deal that last got done. But I also think the Achane camp is probably asking for a significant amount more than, like, my offer would be in like the 15 range to start. Like, if you told me the Achane camp was asking for 21 and trying to, top the annual average on the Saquon Barkley deal, I would totally believe it because of the way that the cap has exploded, and if you're the Dolphins and if you were to give him 0.1 over top of Saquon Barkley, and I'm not saying like that's good business, bad business, like that. That's neither here nor there at this point. It's just the fact that they want to get a contract extension done, right? And that's, I would guess, Achane is asking for highest paid running back in football, right? If you give him the carrot now, I guarantee you when Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs get their contracts done, I assure you those deals will come in north of what you would give Devon Achane. If you wait for those two other contracts to get done, and the Achane ask is at 21 right now, just use round numbers, right? Feels hefty. But also the cap is significantly higher. And I could tell you, oh boy, I'm going to do math in real time here, but I'm going to use my calculator. If you gave him 21 on a $301.2 million cap, that's less than 7% of the cap is the annual average salary of the contract. That's still like a full percent and a 0.5% below the two highest paid running back contracts in the league. That's about equivalent to the Jonathan Taylor contract that the Colts gave him a few years back. That's from an annual average percentage of cap perspective. It would be the third highest paid running back contract in football if you gave him $21 million. And then from a raw annual average perspective, he would be the highest. But then once Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs get done, both of those on an annual average perspective, I would guess top Achane. So he'd be now the third highest paid on an annual average perspective. But from a percentage of cap perspective, he'd be fifth. That's how resetting markets and constant cap inflation works, right? So if you told me the Dolphins were offering 15 and the Achane camp's kind of thumbing their nose at it, I'd believe you. Just because I think the Achane camp, knowing, hey, tough season this year, not a big running back, just came off a 300-touch season last year. Wide receiver room is what? Oh, you don't have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle like you did coming into the year last year? We know we're probably getting 300 touches plus if we stay healthy again this season. They don't want to wait. So if you're the Dolphins, how do you go about closing that gap? And if they're asking for 21 and you're offering 15, do they meet in the middle and go at 18? And then he's like, oh, he's the second highest paid and he gets in front of Derrick Henry. It will work itself out. And I am confident that it will work itself out because Jon-Eric Sullivan, you could take everything else that he said at face value and they've relatively done it, right? They've improved the infrastructure. They got the team in a healthier cap situation before they made a move on a quarterback. It all starts with a quarterback. The whole team building process starts with a quarterback. They, and that's why from a draft perspective, I think they'll build the team inside out. But they've looked at their pillar players, and the first four names that he mentioned were Aaron Brewer, Patrick Paul, Jordan Brooks, and Devon Achane, right? And then on the introductory interview with Travis Wingfield, Travis asked about Waddle, and he's like, oh, yeah, Waddle, yeah, like really good. Then they talk about, the longevity and the timeline and, getting picks and getting the team in a healthier cap situation, not necessarily being, hey, we're going to create a bunch of cap space, but instead, hey, we're going to create a bunch of cash wiggle room moving forward by cutting our cash budget. So they're like dead last in cash by a healthy amount. And you'll feel that starting in 2027. But everything else that he's talked about is like points of emphasis, and we want to do this, they've done. That's why I believe when they say they're intent on it's a priority to get a Devon Achane deal done. I am fascinated to see how they handle it. And if it gets to the point where you're into mandatory minicamp, and Achane still doesn't show up, then I think that becomes a storyline. But right now, I'm not really worried. That's going to do it for us here today on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys as always for checking the show. Make it a great rest of your Wednesday, and I'll be back to talk to you all again tomorrow. Fins up.